Close your eyes and imagine the backdrop for the fairy tales you loved as a child. Now open them. If you're standing on the shores of Lake Bled, Slovenia, seeing the church-topped island and the castle-topped cliff, then you're already there. Is this the most beautiful place on Earth? I certainly think so, and I'm not alone. Millions of visitors have marveled at the fairy tale perfection of Bled, Slovenia. This podcast brings you the wonders of Bled, its people, places, foods, history, and experiences. Everything you need for a perfect holiday. I'm your host, Noah Charney, and this is the Bled Podcast. Is this the most beautiful place on Earth? Let's begin. Here's the thing about Bled, and you probably noticed it already. It's very popular. If you're there now listening to this podcast, then you know what I mean. If you'd like to either take a short break from the more populous parts of Bled, or just explore a place that most Slovenes don't realize is part of the Bled township, but is worth a day trip, then head over to Bohinjska Bela, just a 5-minute drive away. Don't be confused. Though the name of the neighboring lake, 15 kilometers away, Lake Bohinj, is part of the name of the village, this is part of the Bled municipality, and just a short walk from the lake.
Mi imamo zelo tako neprepoznavno ime, Bohinjska Bela. In vsi nas locirajo v Bohinj.
The name is confusing, as Franska Gregorc, a local who shows me around, tells me. Most of Slovenia thinks it's close to Bohinj, but the name comes from the fact that it's on the way to Bohinj. In fact, you could easily walk from Lake Bled. There's a trail that takes less than 30 minutes on foot, or it's a 5-minute drive. But man, it feels miles away in terms of vibe. And it's got far more going on than I realized before Franska gave me a tour. We wound up spending several hours together and walking 9,000 steps, in case you were wondering. This is what I learned. Fact number 1. If there's anyone you're likely to meet while visiting Bohinjska Bela, it's Bojana Humar. Bojana runs the only cafe in town, which is also the only snack bar. She also runs the post office, which also contains the only cash machine. I arrived earlier than Franska planned to meet me, so sat down for a coffee. But I saw that the cafe, Galetovec 1265, only took cash, so I asked the nice lady behind the counter where the cash machine is. In the post office, she replied. I nodded knowingly, then exited the cafe. I'd seen a sign for the post office, so I walked around the building, which contains the village cultural center. I did a loop all around the building looking for the post office entrance until I returned to where I'd began, in front of the cafe. Turns out the post office doorway was literally next to the cafe entrance. I'd just taken the longest possible route. Ah well, that's how you get 9,000 steps in one morning. In I walk to the post office. I ring a little bell on the counter, and out pops Bojana Humar. I started giggling. It was like some Mr. Bean episode with a single person running everything in a village. She helped me take cash out of a machine at the post office, which is actually a post nook. Then I exited the post office, took a step and a half, entered the cafe, and handed her the cash. The system works. I'd actually been to this cafe once before a few years back. The only restaurant in the village is at the other end by the train station. I'd gone with my family, but they were all full, so we didn't know where to go. I hopped on Google Maps and searched for restaurants. A photo appeared of some exciting-looking smoked trout that appeared to be served out of the local post office. Indeed, it was Bojana's place. Turns out she serves an excellent smoked trout, but only during the tourist season, so June to August. Now, by this time, Franska had arrived, and we started our walking tour.
In Bohinjska Bela leži ob reki Savi, na levem bregu reke Save, od spodaj je krasna Sava Bohinjka. Na desni strani je
Bohinjska Bela has a population of fewer than 600 people, but it is a long village divided over 3 sections. It sits squished between Pokluka Plateau and the 1,265-meter-high Galetovec, which is where Bojana's cafe gets its name. Villages called Koprivnik and Goljuše are just beyond, and there are some stories about them, of which more later. Across the Sava-Bohinja River Valley is Babje Zob, Hag's Tooth Mountain, of the legend of the giant dentist and the dragon with the toothache that we covered in a different episode. part of the Jelovica Plateau. Now there's a cave beneath Babia Zob that has been a tourist destination since the 19th century. It can be visited by prior arrangement and with a guide, but it's fitted with electricity, over 300 meters of cave gallery, and it makes for a fascinating excursion, which is also nice and cool in the summer. Most noticeable about Bohinjska Bela are the limestone cliffs that run spine-like behind it, the greaves of Pogluka Plateau, we might say. The houses here were intentionally built right up against the cliffs, which Franska calls boulders, in order to maximize the relatively modest parcels of agricultural land between the boulders and the river. There's no other village in Slovenia that has quite the same orientation. The added benefit is that the boulders can be climbed. What puts this village on the world map is that it's a popular center for rock climbing, particularly Iglica, a rock wall that runs around 40 meters high and is 350 meters long. It hosts training and competition for climbers, but there's also a rift in the wall that the locals have used to sandwich in very steep but well-maintained steel staircases. It's a vertical climb, but one that rewards us with a striking view from the cliff top of the village, the valley, and Lake Bled in the near distance. Iglica also features a waterfall, but the amount of water that is actually falling depends on the weather, so don't necessarily expect Niagara Falls Jr. Turning towards Bohinj, Franska shows me a second rock wall that is also a magnet for serious climbers and the site of competitions. At the far end of the valley, as far as we can see, there is a narrowing of the valley to a point that was once so tight that it could only be passed by a single horse, one at a time in single file. There is the village of Oberne, the name of which means turn around. It got its name from a story that a Turkish raiding party that pillaged its way around Lake Bled came through this valley and got all the way to the narrow pass, but there they turned around. They thought that this was the end of the world, Franska says, so they decided to go no further and never made it all the way to Bohinj. A striking stretch of railroad bridge lances its way through the village. This was built around 1905 as part of the train line commissioned by the Austro-Hungarians to link Jesenice to Novogorica. The line still runs, and the stone-arched bridges are architecturally beautiful, as are some bridges over the Sava Bohinjka that date from the same time, and a gorgeous photogenic one over the Sucha stream. Sucha means dry, and the stream often has hardly any water at all, is artfully draped in ivy.
No, ta pot, po kateri se zdaj sprehajamo, če bi šla naravnost, bi prišla na Bled.
Okay. Franska walked me down to the Sava Bohinjka River, where at one point a natural sand beach is tucked along the banks, a great point for swimming. Here in Lake Bled and Lake Bohinj you can find alpine beaches, complete with sand, but set along the crystalline mountain waters. As you might imagine, this is fly fishing central. The biggest prize is Danube salmon, sulets, but you'll also find brown trout, grayling, rainbow trout, and chub. The river is formed by the outflow of Lake Bohinj, and it snakes along 32 kilometers. Fly fishing season is April 1st through November 14th, and you do need to buy a fishing license. The best option is to hire a local guide who can sort you out with everything you need, from paperwork to equipment and expert guidance. We turned and looked back up towards Gorjuše and Oberne. Franska told me of Valentin Vodnik, an important cultural figure in Slovenia, and he worked as a priest in the village of Koprivnik overlooking Bohinjska Bela. Born in 1758 in Ljubljana, Vodnik was a Franciscan priest and Enlightenment intellectual who worked under the patronage of a local baron, Sigmund Zois. He is best known for two things, poetry and cooking. Vodnik authored the first cookbook in the Slovenian language, Kuharske Bukve from 1799, as well as translating a manual for midwives in 1818. His poems were written in Slovenian, which was quite a radical thing to do in an entirely German-speaking environment. He was a passionate mountaineer who climbed Triglav and has a peak named after him on the way up, Vodnikov Vršac, at a spot where he would stop to write, while catching his breath, no doubt. His poems include one about Bohinjska Bela, written when he cast his eye over it, looking at it from Gorjuše in the direction of Lake Bled, and it's become the Bohinjska Bela national anthem, as Franska jokes, possibly the only village in the world to have its own national anthem. Every July 20th, there's a special holiday in the village, St. Margaret's Day, when this poem is recited, set to music by local children. The other big day out in the village is December 26th, St. Stephen's Day, when people gather at the Church of St. Stephen to have their horses blessed, so don't forget to bring yours if you've got one. Bohinjska Bela is set up as a place to walk to, from, and through. Trails are clearly marked that will bring you to and from Lake Bled, less than 30 minutes by foot, as well as in various directions, all in trails designed to be loops so you start and finish at the same spot without having to retrace your steps. A handy map is available at the cultural center in the middle of town. If in doubt, ask Boyana Humar. She's also got ducks and chickens if you're in the need of any fowl. Biking trails are marked red for easy or blue for advanced, and you'll find trails leading you around various plateaus, Galentovec, Usojnica, and Slamniki. There's also a thematic trail with interactive activities that stops along the way for young children, the Grumble Bear Trail. I'll be back with my family to tackle some of those friendly walking trails. Boyana Humar will be there, hopefully with smoked trout, probably also at the post office, and maybe even with some ducks. Thanks for joining us for this episode of the Bled Podcast. Is this the most beautiful place on earth? The official podcast of the Bled Tourist Board. In each episode, we explore Bled and its surroundings. You'll find it all here, in this image of paradise.